I am Daniel Likis, and welcome to Movie 101. Movie 101 is created to empower movies itself, and of course, the beautiful Miss Safa Bernal.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic time zone, morning, noon, night, evening, wherever you are, whatever you are doing. Happy summer solstice or winter solstice, depending on where you are in the world. And I hope everybody has just a fantastic time.
Yes, fantastic summer.
Right here it's summer. It was beautiful yesterday. Today I'm looking at it going, I think we're being betrayed.
Betrayed by the climate change.
Summer!
Summer, where are you? So, Miss Bernal, what is our topic for today?
Today we are going to talk about one of my favorite writer-directors of all time, the legendary Guy Ritchie. I love his movies. I love his vibe. His earlier stuff hit just so ragged and so hard in a time where British crime movies, especially with a sort of London flair, were not in the main zeitgeist really at all anymore. And he just revived such an incredible branch of the film industry in its rawness and in its fantastic intertwined storylines. Guy Ritchie, director of Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch, Sherlock Holmes, and the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare.
Yes. So, Miss Bernal, if we compare Guy Ritchie to American director.
Oh, well, number one, I think we have to recognize where Guy Ritchie was in what kind of time frame. So Guy Ritchie was born in the late 1960s in Hertfordshire in the UK. So he was sort of, bathed in this incredible boom of British culture as he grew up. And the only thing he really wanted to do was make films, according to reports, and so by the time he was 15 years old, here's this kid who drops out of school. Okay, for all of you who are thinking about dropping out of school, please don't. Please go to school. Please finish high school, whatever you need, get your degree. Just do it. Please just finish school at the same time. He dropped out at 15 and got a job in the film industry. And he just started as a runner. He started as this kid at the bottom of the totem pole and then worked his way up. And he did a couple, of music videos, a couple commercials, and then he did a short film, which was the prequel to Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, one of my favorite movies of all times, starring Vinnie Jones and several other just amazing talents. You've got Jason Fleming, you've got Nick Moran, you've got Jason Statham and Vinnie Jones, all kind of appearing in this really gritty side of London. Oftentimes I think with a lot of us, especially those of us here in the Commonwealth, we tend to have, or at least we did at the time in, the 90s, we tended to have this sort of, oh yes, there's the Queen on the boat again in Buckingham Palace, oh, look, it's the Royal Ascot. We had this wonderful kind of sense of British culture. Doctor Who with Christopher Eccleston as the Ninth Doctor had not yet made an appearance. We have a sort of lull here when it comes to certain things in British culture. And then all of a sudden, this incredibly gritty, bad side of every part of town kind of film comes out. And it was a revelation. It was just, I loved it, So I think that the grit that he brings, the British perspective that he brings, and not necessarily the most polished British perspective, which, is just fantastic to see. And it feels so visceral and so kind of in your face when it comes to that sort of thing. And I think I love that Guy Ritchie has. I love, that you can tell where he came from by watching his films. And I think, when you have certain American directors and things like that, you can also get that sense of place from their work too, but their sense of place is America. And America tends to, in my opinion, present itself as this sort of, American culture is something that almost everybody kind of may understand, which is not necessarily true. Sorry, America. As somebody who is not American myself, I can tell you that there are differences between, Canadian culture and American culture. I've never understood that more than when I talk to my fellows of the trio known as We Aren't Dead Yet. It's another podcast that I'm on, and Emily and Cass are both American, and they'll say something, I'll be like, translation, please. I don't understand. They're like, oh, it's an American thing. I'm like, oh, okay. They're like, you didn't know that? No.
We're not being biased.
It's just everywhere has a sense of place. And although culture is incredibly global now, and we can see things from all over the world, we can see things from all sorts of different cultures, that doesn't mean we necessarily understand or inhabit those pieces of a culture, which you really have to understand or inhabit through living there, in the same way that you can get that sense of place through Guy Ritchie's early work like Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, even things like Rock and Rolla. It's...
Yes. So, Ms. Bernal, what was Guy Ritchie's directorial debut and what's impact on his career?
So his first feature is Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. There was a 20-minute prequel movie that was put forward, which a fairly famous musician's wife saw and went, I'm going to bankroll your feature. And so... first up, you have this gritty 1998, one of the most impressive British movies of the last decade for them. It is a movie with crime and unwitting poker players and incredible amounts of diverging storylines that inevitably they seem like they're distant and apart, and then they come together in the end. And that is something I really particularly like about Guy Ritchie's work. It is something that he's incredibly famous for. And it started with Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, where you have this London criminal underground. You have these unwitting friends that are going in on a poker game thinking they're going to make a whole bunch of scratch. And then, oh, no, the poker game's rigged. Well, what are we going to do now? How are we going to get our money? What are we going to have, happen because of that? You have Vinnie Jones, which before Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels was just a football player, as in footballs and soccer, proper football. Go Unity FC. It's my favorite football club. It's a local club here in the Lower Mainland of BC, Unity FC. And he takes this sort of gritty, kind of dark situation. It includes things like people who are growing certain plants of an illicit nature and all sorts of different other things. And he weaves this narrative, which by the end, you just are sitting there going, what is this? Why am I so entertained? And then you're like, oh, I get it now. And then you watch it again, you're like, wow, this was brilliant. And you could totally see that, there's an interview with Guy Ritchie saying that he looked at people who'd graduated from film school as they're, potentially boring, that the movies they created were kind of boring and they were kind of, stock in place, that sort of thing. And then you see something like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels with all of the interconnected storylines, all of these different things that when I was in film school, we were taught not to do. Like, oh no, you're going to complicate it too much. Don't have that many storylines. Oh no, you're going to complicate it too much. Don't do this, don't do that. And he basically breaks every rule that I was taught in film school. And he does it in such an incredibly visceral way that it made pure magic. So it really did blend to violence and comedy. And I mean, we've had action comedies before, I'm thinking in the 80s too, there's quite a few of them, but the way that his violence is so kind of immediate and raw while intense, and yet the comedy is this sort of almost dark humor offside sort of comedy that catches you by surprise, but feels to me, after having been there several times, feels very London. It feels very of its place. And oh man,
something else. So,
I
Miss
loved
Bernal, what is the influence in British cinema of Guy Ritchie's movie or
We had a
movies?
huge, yeah, that's we had a huge uptick in gangster films, in British gangster films, in the more raw side of British culture, a little bit less of the finessed side of the culture, which I obviously love. There are quite a few things in the sort of more formal British culture that I'm quite enamored by. Let me put it that way. But he brought this sort of idea that comedy, this isn't comedy for children. This isn't comedy for kids. It's not like, oh, it's a comedy. It'll be fine. We can play it for our 12-year-old. I don't know how old I was when I saw Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. I know I wasn't in my 20s. So,
You're revealing your
maybe it was more
age.
formative than I think. But I saw it, you know what? I must have been a teenager when I first saw it. It had been out for a few years and things like that when I saw it, but my older brother and I snuck it in and watched it when we were, oh, where's grandma? Make sure she can't see this movie. Oh my goodness, look at that. There's guns. I think it brought this sort of nonlinear storytelling back in a very intrinsic way. It brought in this idea of multiple storylines, which seems so distant and so different, but by the end, you're like, oh, I get it now. I see where they connect. Aha, there it is. And I think he did this in such a stylistic way that it kind of allowed people to experiment again. It allowed people to be like, okay, hey, if that's really interesting to people and they really like that movie, then maybe it's okay that we don't necessarily have everybody doing some version of a transatlantic accent or some version of a proper accent. Instead, you've got these thick Cockney accents, you've got this authenticity to each of the characters, and you have an incredible amount of fun, and some of it uncouth fun, which I think needs to be there with a gangster movie. I don't think you can be couth when you're trying to make a film about gangsters and shotguns.
Yes.
But I think it really gave people that ability to play.
Yes, for sure. So, what are some
Mhm.
common stylistic elements found in Guy Ritchie's films?
Mhm. Lots of really colorful characters, which
Mm,
are often eccentric. They often have very unique names, very unique personalities. I mean, this guy basically started Vinnie Jones' career um, as a as a film star. Also Jason Statham got a lot of his early work with Guy Ritchie as well. Not only, but he was present in a lot of that. Uh, and two, you look at Rock and Rolla, which is another one of his films that did quite well, and you have Gerard Butler kind of breaking out of the United Kingdom and coming into the field of view of people in across the world. And so you have these really eccentric and colorful people. They're not necessarily good guys and bad guys. They're all just eccentric to the nth. Even Brad Pitt's character in Snatch, you remember those people. They are odd souls, they're odd ducks, and he does that in a way that's still fairly charming. And I really like that part of it. It's very difficult to hate Vinnie Jones when he's taking his kid around trying to, hustle and make those dollars. I guess it's those pounds sterling, pardon me. I think another thing is just that incredible blend of violence and comedy. We see that too in the clever repartee that we get in the Sherlock Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. Those are Guy Ritchie films as well. And you get a lot of this very fast paced, stylized camera work. It's very kinetic. I think that his cinematography style, that style of a lot of his films, it's this fast, stylized camera, this energy that's not going to let you go. You're not going to see the same kind of long panning, slow camera work shots that you would get in something like one of my favorite movies, which is The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, just because it's shot so beautifully. Like with a movie like that, you're looking for these slow, long, carefully planned shots where you see the beauty of an image unfold over time in natural light. I love that kind of filmmaking. I also love this, rapid fire, bam, 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 still fairly stabilized. So you're not getting into, Cloverfield levels of shaky cam yet. But you're getting this very energy forward filmmaking, lots of that kind of like cut, bop, 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 bop. You're getting shots that are sort of longer shots. You're getting lots of motion in them. You're following somebody as they're about to blow somebody's head off with a shotgun that they sawed off in the back of their car. You've got all of these different just visual cues that you're going to be gripping part of your seat. You're just going to be like, okay, I'm watching now. You're just kind of in it. You're there. And I love that about his work. I love the immediacy of a Guy Ritchie film. I love the dialogue. He was bringing, sort of Cockney slang and things like that into the forefront in a way that people outside of the UK really had not heard very much outside of the Dickensian era of, oi, what's it, governor? Like, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is a real dialect. I have no idea how it works, and you're learning all these things by listening to Guy Ritchie films. And I loved it. I love that about his work.
So do you think Miss Bernal Guy Ritchie is good for DC or Marvel movies?
I think he would have a lot of. Ooh, I mean, Marvel historically has been more playful.
Mm.
DC historically has been more, it's been more sort of dour. Pardon me. I mean, but we've seen the way that, Man of Steel, anyone? Again, I love that movie. I love the director's cut. I love the Snyder cut of the Justice League movie. I thought it was fantastic. It was an event, not a movie.
Yes.
We watched it over a series of days. I absolutely love Zack Snyder's early work, so I'm not trying to drag on the man at all. I think, looking at The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which Guy Ritchie directed in 2015, I mean, you could make a play for him directing some form of Batman. You could make a play for him doing Green Lantern. You could make a play for him doing, quite a few of the characters from DC. But I think I would love to see what he would do with Excalibur from Marvel's X-Men universe.
Oh, yes.
There's some really fun, even Alpha Flight in Canada, which, for those of you who may not be in on the comics, Alpha Flight was a Marvel Comics team made up of Canadian mutants and other superheroes. And so I would love to see Guy Ritchie do some form of like Alpha Flight meets Excalibur meets tangential X-Men sort of movie. I think he could really tie things together really well. And I think too, there was this comic book run for years in Marvel, the Onslaught saga. I think Guy Ritchie would make something incredibly special out of Onslaught. And that would be really cool to see. So I'm going to have to say Marvel, I think. As much as I think he could do it all, I would do
Yes,
Marvel.
definitely looking forward for that, Mr. Guy Ritchie. But before we go on, Miss Bernal, let's shout out our listeners of course, in United Kingdom, because in England we got 71% audience share, Scotland at 15, and Wales at 15%. Thank you, United Kingdom, for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower movies and movies itself. So, Miss Bernal, how does Ritchie utilize music in his films to enhance storytelling?
Well, firstly, he seems to like casting musicians. in
Mm.
a lot of roles. And you look at certain things like Rock and Rolla, where you have that theme of, an aging rock star who is really, finding his way. And there's this one part of Rock and Rolla, this one scene where they have said aging rock star kind of make commentary on the world based on, a cigarette package and things. And just this sort of one part raw, one part very clever sort of take on the whole industry and things like that. I really liked. I think, with Guy Ritchie, you get a lot, okay, the soundtrack from Sherlock Holmes from those movies was fantastic. You get the violin, you get a sort of kind of fiddleish violin there in some parts too. You have the slightly off kilter giant orchestrations, and I think one thing I liked about the Sherlock Holmes movies too is that they felt very shot with a sort of sensation of it still being within that time period that you would have gotten the original Sherlock Holmes back at the turn of the last century. And I really like how music was developed in Snatch. And so you get some, popular songs, you get some things that really, kind of are very familiar. And then it's paired in and matched with orchestrations that I quite liked.
Mm.
I quite like the music, but I think too, again, pardon me, his first feature was, bankrolled basically by the wife of somebody who's very popular in the music industry. And so he has this, almost, I would say, love affair with various British musicians and various musicians that we might not necessarily hear, in other parts of the world unless we watch movies like this and go, oh, wow, what about that? Let's listen in on that. That's really cool. I wonder where I can find this person's music. So,
Yes, certainly. So, what role does humor play in Guy Ritchie's films, and how it's typically integrated?
I think especially in the early films, you know, Lock, Stock, Rock and Rolla, Snatch, all these guys, you get a lot of almost gallows humor. You get the humor from people who are like, I've been through this. I'll go through this again. This is how it goes. La 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 la, kablam. I think that his humor kind of grew up a little bit as he got larger and larger projects, with Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows. You end up having a little bit more of that sort of cleverness that you get from Robert Downey Jr. And that sort of, witty repartee is a bit more intellectual in times with Sherlock Holmes, as, it really should. The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the humor is really camp. And so you're like, ha ha, ha, yeah, there it is. Like, okay, it's that sort of almost suave 009, like, the bomb just went off behind me, but does my suit look okay? That sort of laissez-faire sort of humor. And then in Lock, Stock and his earlier work, you get that grit. You get that, like, well, we just shot somebody's head off, but you know what? It could be worse. My mom could have seen it, And that mixture, too, of using humor to kind of brush off certain acts of violence, or just to kind of show that in some places in the world, certain acts of violence are more normal than in other places. And so it's just another thing that happens that day. That's just another thing to expect. And so you get that kind of sense that that humor is placing you within the character, but also placing you within what your expectations should be on how serious you should take certain things. Yes, somebody just got shot, but you got to clean the blood spatter off of the kid's collar because that's a really expensive leather jacket, and don't you forget it. It's showing you that we're in a different world. We're not in Narnia anymore. This is a completely different place.
Yes. Do you think Guy Ritchie like Monty Python?
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
From the humor
they're
itself.
both they're yeah, you could say. I don't know what his opinion is on Monty Python. I haven't researched that, but looking at the nonlinear storytelling, looking at the, almost non sequitur bunch of things that would come into his earlier work and then attach in the end, I could see some form of, no one suspects
Yes.
Spanish Inquisition. I could see a lot of red herrings in there, just the same way that you would in Monty Python. I mean, it fits the time period too of when Guy Ritchie was growing up and what would be around the cultural zeitgeist, especially in the UK, when he was kind of having those formative years. So
Who knows?
maybe, maybe.
Yes. So, Miss Bernal, in what ways does Guy Ritchie's adaptation of Sherlock Holmes differ from previous versions?
It was a lot more effing fun, I think, a lot more gritty. You got that sense of danger. It was less gentlemanly, I would say. I think there's been, we've had quite a few Sherlocks now since, the 2009 release. And, there was the Sherlock done by the BBC with Benedict Cumberbatch, and we've gotten quite a few different versions of Sherlock Holmes now. And seeing Sherlock as a bit more of a basket case being barely held together by a collection of you know, self-given methods. I think that was very almost dangerous. Like, you're taking the veneer off of this character, which, let's be honest here, Sherlock Holmes, and I mean, he was kept together by Dr. Watson, incredibly intelligent man in the original stories, but also a mess, and I think that he played that sort of almost neurodivergent eccentricity as far as he could in a major Hollywood film. I liked how, Robert Downey Jr. was allowed to embody this character and to embody this character for all his faults. Again, it's not that sense of perfection. It's the guy in the room that's saying the blatantly obvious to him things, with regardless of whether or not it's going to potentially cause waves or hurt somebody, and that kind of, again, I think I'm going to use the term neurodivergent here just because that's, fairly consistent with the original character, if you read it that way in Arthur Conan Doyle's work. He played really well with that, while at the same time, Sherlock Holmes is getting bloody. He's got bruises. He's a bit of a mess. He's dealing with things on the bad side of town, and yet at the same time it's incredibly clever and it's incredibly heartfelt, and he saves the day, and you just have freaking fun with it. It's a little bit less about, look at how much smarter I am than you, although that part of it is present, but it's this cavalcade of Victorian era life. And I think by the time we get to A Game of Shadows and we get to Moriarty, this is not those sanitized radio shows from back in the day anymore, when you have, spoiler alert, but the movie's more than 10 years old, so you only get spoiler
You're
alerts for the
qualified.
first 10 years. Yeah. But when you have Moriarty hanging Sherlock off a meat hook while listening to the Fisherman song and swinging him around in an abandoned place because war is profitable, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not in that lovely little London tea room. We're not having crumpets with the Queen. This is a gritty thing that lives in its own space, and it feels like its own universe. And I just love what he did.
Yes, legendary. But before we go on, Miss Bernal, I just want to plug in our fundraiser, a Book 101 review. I just launched our Book 101 Review Foundation to help less fortunate children all over the world. Let's empower less fortunate people. Let's give them a good education through this foundation. And every donation that you will give, 100% or 100% it will go to these needy children all over the
Excellent.
world. So, Miss Bernal, let's plug your books.
So, as well as being a film buff who loves gritty, violent movies, which
Gritty
have a breath of
movies.
humor in them, yeah.
Yes.
Aside from all of that, I myself am a cyberpunk and mythpunk author. I am the author of Neon Lieben, Char and Dash, Son of Abel, Book of Revels, Usurper Kings, and Coco Craze. And I've got more books coming out. You can find out more about my books, where to get them, and whether or not they are in your local public library, please do request them at your local public library, because that's a great way for more people to read. And read even if they, might not have the income to be able to purchase 17 books at a time. I know I don't have that income anymore because times be tough. But my website is saphaburnell.com. That is SAPHABURNELL.com or .ca. We got the Canadian one in there too.
Yes, Canadian, eh?
Canadian, eh?
Yes,
Can you tell?
yes, let's support Miss Safa Burnell, because if you support her, more books to come. We're looking for good Ninja Gap this year.
Oh, it's going to be so good. I'm excited about it.
Yes, so Miss Burnell, if you rate a Mr. Guy Ritchie from 1 to 10 as a director, where is it?
So here's the thing. Okay, I love Guy Ritchie. Every once in a while, he's a little bit more miss than hit. So he can be a bit of a hit and miss every once in a while. So I can't rate him 10 out of 10. There have been some things like nobody wants to remember the movies that he made with Madonna, like Swept Away. No one wants to remember that exists. But I'm still going to give him like an 8.5, almost 9 out of 10, because I think the majority of his movies that really hit fantastically well. And he's got such a incredible presence to his movies. And it was something quite different from anything else that I was seeing at that, time period and since. So I'm going to give him like an 8.5 out of 10.
Yes, Mr. Guy Ritchie, thank you for sharing your talents to the world. And thank you. More movies to come. So, Miss Bernal, thank you for your time.
And thank you for yours. See you, everybody.
See you, everyone. More to come, people. See you soon.